Hi everybody, this is the Introduction to Homeric Greek. My name is Graeme and I'm a former student and friend of Gregory Naj, who many of you know. And we're going to be talking about the Greek alphabet. To get us started, obviously we need to know the Greek alphabet. And there's a document that you should have access to and even be able to see, which I've called the Greek alphabet with reference to core vocab words. And this is based on a document put together by Greg Naj that many of you will know from your studies, dealing with core vocabulary words in Homer and some of the later literature that you might have read. So I'm going to be referring to this document as we work through the alphabet to get a handle on how the letters look when you're reading them, also how to write them when you're writing in Greek, and also how to pronounce them, because there are a few sounds in Greek that are a bit unfamiliar to native English speakers. And there are some letters that when you write them, they look one thing in English, but they might be a different letter in Greek. Let's start with the first letter, alpha. And for each one, I've put an uppercase and a lowercase. So you'll see uppercase alpha, lowercase alpha. And then I've put a word, a Greek word from the core vocab list. Almost all of these are from the core vocab list, with a couple of exceptions. So the first one is agathos. And I'm not going to really talk about accents today, but you will see that there's an accent on the second to last letter. All I'll do with that is I'll stress that syllable. So I'll say agathos. The letter in question so far is the alpha. So there's two alphas in this word, one at the very beginning, and then the third letter is also an alpha. Most of the letters in these words are lowercase because most of the text that you read will be lowercase. We'll look at capitals a little bit. So that agathos, that alpha, it can be there's two ways it can be pronounced, as an a or as an a short or a long. And by practice, you'll get to know which one it's going to be. But all that to say, the first word, agathos. We go down to the second letter, which is beta, a capital beta and a lowercase beta. And the word from the core vocab, you'll notice, since this is a Homeric Greek course, I'm going to do the one in parentheses, which is, we would pronounce ba. Again, we're focusing on the first letter, the beta. It's a B, pretty much like an English B, so ba. And in the language, that's a Homeric word meaning force or violence, as you can see. We move to the third letter, a gamma, and an uppercase gamma and a lowercase gamma. And then the core vocab word there is genos, genos. And the meaning there is given as stock, as in breeding, generating, or generation, etc. Another very important word in the core vocab. So far, our letters sound pretty much like they would in English, and that continues. Delta, the fourth letter, capital delta and a lowercase delta, is in ancient Greek is just a D. In modern Greek, it's different, but in classical and earlier Greek, it's just a D. So our core word there is demos. Demos, meaning district, population, also comes to mean people, from which we get democracy. And the plural of demos I put in there also is demoi. And that's interesting. We'll talk about diphthongs later, but that word ends in a diphthong, which is two vowels together pronounced as one syllable, oi. So some Greek words, lots of Greek words end in diphthongs. It's very often a grammatical ending. In this case, it's the nominative plural. Demos is the nominative singular. Demoi is the nominative plural. And as we get into grammar, we'll talk about what nominative plural means. Okay, we move to the fifth letter, epsilon, a capital epsilon and a lowercase epsilon, which is a short E. And so the pronunciation is something like as in English, get. And our sample word here is epos, and a very important word in Homeric Greek, from which we get the word epic. And so as the definition there is a word said, an utterance, or a poetic utterance. In this case, the plural of epos looks a bit different. It's epea, epea, a 3-syllable word, which has another epsilon in it. So this is the short e, if you like, epos, epea. We move on to the 6th letter. You might have heard it as zeta, but I'll call it zeta for now, a capital Z and a lowercase z. But in fact, the pronunciation, as far as scholars know at the moment, it's a Z plus a D, zd. So it's a kind of a tricky one to say. And the sample word given there is, and I'll say it according to that pronunciation, zdoe, or if I stress the last syllable, zdoe. And you might recognize a woman's name that comes from that, which would be Zoe. So that means life. Here's another word, sozdain. So this has got a zeta in the middle of the word, the verb to save. So both, well, the second word is in the core vocab. The first word I think was not in the core vocab, but it's a pretty important word. So we have the word to life and the word to save. Okay, letter number 7. Eta, an uppercase and a lowercase eta. And this is, we had epsilon as a short e. This is a long e. This is hard for English speakers to say, especially English speakers like me that come from, I'm from New Zealand, so we tend to say a. Sounds terrible. But anyway, so this word, which is one of the core words, this actually, and I'm going to talk about rough breathing in a minute. If you look at the comma on top of the eta, it's pointing to the right, which means there's going to be an H. So this is going to be heros, meaning hero. So whenever a Greek word starts with a vowel, it has to, on top of that vowel, either have a comma facing to the right, in which case there's an H before the vowel, or a comma facing to the left, in which case there's no H before the vowel. So this has an H. So one more time, heros. And the plural of that is right there too, heroes. Heroes. It's a 3-syllable word meaning heroes, plural. And in the very beginning of Homer's Iliad, we've got heroes mentioned because that's a huge part of the story, because lots of them died. Okay, now we get to letter number 8, which is theta. We have a capital theta and a lowercase theta. And we'll pronounce that as a th, as in think. Technically, that's called a fricative. It's a sound that has friction as you say it. If you go way back into early Homeric times, it might have been pronounced as a T plus an H. But we'll do it as a theta. And our word from the core vocab list is thumos. And the definition given, heart or spirit, designates the realm of consciousness of rational and emotional functions. A very, very key word in Homer. Thumos. Okay, we go to letter number 9. Iota. A capital iota and a lowercase iota. You'll notice in Greek that the lowercase iota, you never dot your I's in Greek. So it's a dotless I. And our sample word here, and you'll notice that the first vowel starts with a comma facing to the right, so it has an H. So this is hieros. The iota can be long or short. It could be an I or an E, okay? And you just have to learn it by listening to the words and practicing. So in this case, hieros, meaning sacred or holy. We get English words like hierarchy coming from this word. Okay, we move to letter number 10, kappa. A capital kappa, a lowercase kappa. In the font that's on our document here, there's multiple ways of doing a lowercase kappa. This one might look, well, it's a kappa. It might look not like the kind of kappa you might see in another font. It doesn't have the high vertical that an English K would have. So it's just like a small version of a capital. Our key word from the core vocab here is kleos, that I bet you all know well because it's a key word in Homer. The glory, the fame, the reason why warriors will fight to the death, so that people will tell stories about their honor and how famous they were. So kleos in the singular, in the plural, klea. And occasionally you find the plural in Homer, the plural of glory or fame or stories told about a warrior. We move to letter number 11. Lambda, capital lambda, lowercase lambda. These are pretty unfamiliar if you haven't done the Greek alphabet before. But pronunciation, just an L. So our keyword here is lusa. And this is from the core vocab. So rage, fury, or frenzy, lusa. And as Greg put in, related to the word lukos, wolf. So the image is one of wolf-like rage. By the way, it's interesting the number of words for rage and anger there are in Homer. We'll get to another one actually right now. Letter number 12 is mu. So an uppercase mu and a lowercase mu. And our key word, I'll read this word, is manus. Notice it has an eta, so it's got a long a, manus. And this is another word for anger. Greg calls it superhuman anger.
Cosmic anger.
Yes, the very first word in Homer's Iliad is this, superhuman anger. And by the way, this is letter 12. We're halfway through the alphabet. And by the way, there are 24 letters in the Greek alphabet. There are 24 books of the Iliad, or scrolls. And it's no coincidence, I think, that the 24 letters, each one matches up with one of the books of the Iliad and also of the Odyssey. So, so we're halfway through. Okay, letter number 13, nu, uppercase N and a lowercase nu. That one doesn't look like, the lowercase doesn't look like an N, it looks like a V, so be very careful with that. And our core word here, starting with nu, is nostos. And this meaning return or homecoming, song about homecoming, return to light and life. Very, very important, especially in the beginning of the Iliad, where when a warrior, the two goals of a warrior are to win lots of kleos by beating the enemy, hopefully, and then achieve one's nostos by getting home safely.
Right. So already we've had some of the keywords in all Homeric epic, right?
I think we have. That's why it's such a great list that Greg put together of the core words. Yes.
So I'm so glad you pulled this together for us for learning the alphabet, because we're coming to terms with these words right away.
Thanks, Claudia. Yes, exactly. Okay, letter number 14. Now I say xi. Do Americans say xi?
Xi, yeah, okay. I hear it both ways. Yeah, xi usually.
You can tell I'm a foreigner, I'm sure. So xi or xi, uppercase and lowercase. Kind of hard to draw these ones, especially the lowercase. It's got lots of little curls. And so when we, we already passed zeta or zeta, which has not quite as many curls as xi. If we scroll back, yes, if we look at zeta again, it's got the lowercase has one less loop than the xi, which means, I guess, that's a way to distinguish them, because you obviously don't want to mix them up. So here's our word, xenos, our core word, singular xenos, plural xenoi, and a stranger who should be treated like a guest by a host, or like a host by a guest, another huge theme in Homer. And if you're a good host and look after your guests, you should get rewarded. If you're a bad host, you should get punished. And one of the worst hosts was, you might remember, Polyphemus. Not only did he mistreat his guests, he ate half of them. But then there were also bad guests. There are good guests, but there are bad guests, like the suitors in the Odyssey, who do not treat their host and the place that they're guests, they don't treat it properly. They eat all the food without showing any respect. Very, very serious stuff. We move to letter number 15, Omicron. Easiest one to draw, probably. This is the short O, so and by the name, Omicron, little o. So we have a capital Omicron and a lowercase Omicron. And our sample word here is oikos, and meaning house, dwelling, abode, resting place of cult hero, family line. We actually get the English word economics from that, but that's another story. Notice, by the way, in the word oikos, it starts with a diphthong, oi, and it has a comma facing left, which means there's no H, but because it's a diphthong, the comma goes over the second letter of the diphthong. We'll talk about that again in a minute, but just to let you know, diphthong means the two vowels are treated separately, are treated together, and you put the mark over the second one. You don't worry about the circumflex. I'm just treating that as a stress accent. Oikos.
Right, and when you say circumflex, you mean that curved line.
The curvy thing.
Yep.
Yes, which in some fonts it's just a curve. In other, it's like a tilde in Spanish, so it's the same thing. Okay, letter 16. I say pi. You say pi?
Pi or P?
Pi
Yeah,
or P?
depends.
Yes.
You hear both ways.
You'll hear this in mathematics too, if you're still doing mathematics. Which of course the Greeks were brilliant at mathematics too. And it's just the p sound. So our sample word is polis from the core vocab list. Polis meaning city or city-state. So important in Greek, and we get many English derivatives like political, etc. Okay, our next letter, 17. Some people say ro or hro. I'll just go with ro, I think. But why did I say hro? Because if you look at words beginning with ro, like this one here, which is not from the core vocab, I think there weren't any words beginning with ro in the core vocab, so I found this one. Rhythmos, or if I stress the last syllable, rhythmos. But you notice over the R, even though it's not a vowel, it has a comma pointing to the right. So ro is the only consonant that has a comma pointing to the right over it, which doesn't mean that you should try and pronounce the H, or you could if you like, but there's historical reasons for that, and it means that a lot of English words that we get from Greek start with RH, like the word rhythm. So rhythm or motion. Okay, so that's 17. Letter 18.
So now we have 3.
We have 3. We have our only triplet. So we have a capital sigma, and then we have two lowercase sigmas. And the first lowercase is used at the beginning or the middle of a word. The second lowercase sigma, so the third form you see, is only at the end of a word. So I don't actually have one in this word, there's one in the next word. But what we do have here is a core vocab word starting with sigma, sema. Sema, and the plural, semata, meaning a sign or a symbol. And it can also mean a tomb, which is a sign or a symbol.
And then here, do you want to?
Yes, and at the end of the next word, and after the letter T, ends with a sigma, so it's got the final sigma because it's the end of a word. That was probably the Greeks used that when they wrote manuscripts with no breaks between the words. Since so many Greek words end with a sigma, that would help you know where one word ended and the next one begins. So okay, so we get to this letter, which is tau, capital tau, little tau. So it's just a T as in English. Notice that the lowercase tau, the vertical doesn't cross through the horizontal as it would in English. So it's just like a little baby T.
Right there.
Yeah, so, and it also, this one has a little curl at the bottom. So if you want to be fancy, you can put a little curl at the bottom. So our word is telos, and the accent on the first syllable on the epsilon, so telos, a core vocab word, and ending, final moment. Look at all those meanings. So many meanings. This just shows us again how rich Greek words are, and how Greg has done such a brilliant job of, he starts really with sort of the basic, simple meaning, and then kind of gets into it more depth and seeing of all the implications.
And so this one is so important when our community had read Hippolytus. This was one of the terms for that.
Yes,
right?
the Greek tragedy, Hippolytus, yes. And there's an English word that comes from this, which is not very common. Teleology, the study of goals and final purposes, but not television. It comes from something else.
That's good.
Yes. Okay. We're getting near the end. So upsilon, and this one is, if we're a little bit fussy, this should be the U, which is not really in English. It's in French and German. U. If you don't want to do that, you could, I guess, say U. But it's worth trying to do an U, which means you do an E sound and you round your lips. E, U. So this is the sound, this is the way we believe that it was pronounced. So a capital upsilon looks like a Y. A lowercase upsilon kind of looks like a U, but it has no vertical bar on the right. And you don't want to confuse it with the nu, which is the one that looks like a V.
Right.
So the nu back up there has a sharp point at the bottom, whereas the upsilon is rounded at the bottom. But it's easy to confuse them, so we have to be careful there. Our sample word here is, and this is an upsilon with a comma facing the right, so it must have an H before it. So huper, preposition meaning over or above. And when you bring that into English, very often an upsilon, when it's borrowed into English, when a Greek word comes into English, it turns into a Y. So we would in English have hyper, which in English now is a separate word, although it was just a preposition in Greek. Okay, moving on to the fourth to the last. I would call it phi, but you might call it phi. And it's traditionally transcribed PH. We will pronounce it just like an F sound. So it's a fricative. If you go way back, it would have been a P plus an H. P. But we'll do it as a F sound. And our core word is philos, which is a very important word in our core vocab. Friend, when it's a noun, meaning friend. When it's an adjective, meaning dear, near and dear, belonging to self. Very, very important word.
Right. Sounds good. Things like your head could be philos.
Your dear head, or your head that belongs to yourself.
It's amazing, right?
You hang on to it as long as possible, right?
Exactly.
Okay. The anti-penultimate word, the third to last letter, I should say, chi or chai. And I tried to distinguish the ch from the k. So way back we had the letter kappa, which is, I think, letter 10, is a straight k as in English, kleos. But let's try and make the chi different, make it more guttural. So ch. We have that in the musician Johann Sebastian Bach, if you really put into it, or the Loch Ness Monster.
And even those little letters can be maybe hard to distinguish at first as you're first getting to read, but over time it'll be easier.
Yes, practice makes perfect. Someone said that once. I still believe it. And okay, so here's our sample word from the core vocab, choros. So choros, meaning a chorus or group of singers or dancers. And if you notice in the core vocab, there's also a word choros with a K, which is a totally different word. So don't confuse them. So do try and do this ch, this guttural pronunciation. Also, when this is transcribed, some people will write it as a CH. I think Greg prefers a KH. Mm-hmm. So when you do Achilles' name, the more accurate way maybe to write Achilles is AKH, whereas traditionally it's ACH. It's the same letter though. Okay, second to last, we have psi or psi. So this is PS as considered as one letter, ps. And our core vocab word here is psyche. Psyche in the singular and psychai in the plural, traditionally translated as soul or essence, as reading here, essence of life while one is alive, conveyor of identity while one is dead. Such an important word. It's right in the very beginning of the Iliad, where implication, the bodies of dead warriors were left on the field to be eaten by birds and dogs, whereas their psyche or their psychai went down to Hades. So their identity went down to Hades. And if you read the Odyssey, you hear about some famous heroes that are in the Odyssey, in the underworld, and their identity is still there, like Achilles and Agamemnon. And by the way, in English, we have quite a few words that come from Greek words that start with PS, like psychology. But because we're slightly lazy in English, we just think we can't pronounce the P, so we just say psychology. And the upsilon becomes a Y as well. Okay, last letter. Omega, which sounds like O plus mega, big O. This is a big O. We had Omicron, little o, which was O. This is omega, so that's O, if you can do a long O.
So one is short and one is long?
One is short and one is long. The capital looks like a strange letter. The lowercase looks like a W. So when you see a W in Greek, it means omega. Our sample word from the core vocab has a comma facing to the right, so it must be an H. Hora. Hora, plural, horai. And the meaning season, seasonality, the right time, the perfect time. And that's our last letter. So Iliad book Omega is Iliad book 24. So that's our 24 basic letters.